My name is Stephanie Marks, and this is the final proposal presentation. So the problem that I chose to look at had to do with ELL, or English Language Learning students. Starting in the late 1990s through the 2000s and through today, there was a large influx in these number of these ELL students in the classroom. There wasn't the same increase in resources or training for teachers and students, so a lot of these different students started to fall behind. So that's the big overarching problem that I started to look at. What I really wanted to test and what I hypothesized is that a classroom that implemented ELL teaching methods with a trained teacher in these methods, such as a SIOP method, will see higher test results than a traditional classroom within the ELL student population. So there would be better quantitative data for these students if they were to have trained teachers and implemented methods. So what has the literature said? What is already existing? What's out there? There are really three different sections or eras of this research that I looked at, and it evolved as the problem became more relevant and as research developed. So the first part is establishing that there was a problem. This is the early 2000s. So the first research studies, there was just a focus on defining what an ELL student was and establishing that there was a problem, that they were falling behind. It was very much student focused. It wanted to establish that each of these students was an individual, that there was no way to just have an ELL program for all students, as there were different levels of proficiency in speaking, in writing, in listening, in reading, as well as academic English versus just conversational English. So really just establishing that there is a need for differentiation even within the ELL student community. This research stage was lacking a lot of pedagogical strategies for teachers, as it was very much student focused. The next sort of era is the middle 2000s, 2010 to about 2014, so getting to the later mid 2010s, and it looked more at what teachers can do. Teacher focused. What can they do within their classrooms to help these students and give these teachers perspectives of what these students are going through and what it is like to be an ELL student. This is also where we see the start of observational research studies, what new methods were available and how to implement those in the classroom. But we don't have a lot of studies here. It was more of what methods have been developed, and then what can teachers kind of do to start helping these students in the classroom. The third stage that we have is the really observational research studies, specifically observational case studies, as well as different qualitative studies. These case studies really looked at, a specific classroom, a specific teacher, maybe a specific school, and what they are doing and how that is successful. But it didn't look at quantitative data. That's where it's really lacking. It was more, oh, how are these students feeling? Look at their talking. Oh, they're able to communicate. And it looked more at how teachers can be supported with aids, with different trainings, as it isn't, plausible to have separate classrooms for these students and have a trained teacher being able to teach all of these different ELL students who are at different levels in their English. So the methodology, what is my study? How is it going to add to the research? So there are kind of the procedure. There's two different parts of this study. There's two stages. The first stage, so students are split into two classrooms. These classrooms, they are going to be teaching, they're going to have two different teachers, but they're going to be teaching the same units, the same content as specified by state standards. One class will just have normal content their teacher will teach as district is prescribed. Both these teachers will be state certified in the content area. And then the other class, we'll call that class B for now, is they will have the same class content, the same unit, but the teacher will implement ELL methods, specifically SIOP methods, into the classroom. So both these classes at the end of their unit, which will be about a month long, will take the same exact end of unit assessment, and the scores will be recorded. It will be anonymous, but ELL students will be flagged just so it's known that these are ELL students, and to specifically look at these scores, but no names will be used in the final research write-up and any sort of analysis. The second stage will be the same procedure as before, but the control and experimental class will switch. So now class A will use the ELL SIOP methods, and class B will use traditional content teaching. Both of these teachers as well will be trained in SIOP. They'll have SIOP training and know how to implement these methods so that students are given, good instruction. Once again, they will take the exact same unit assessment across both classes, and then data will be compared, both between two classes, averages, and from ELL student to themselves to see which of the units they did better on, which unit assessment they did better on, to see if those methods, those ELL teaching methods, were helpful to them. So the sample, it should be about 40 students split into two classrooms, so 20 students per classroom with one teacher in each classroom. There should be a proportional number of ELL students in each classroom based on the school population. The goal would be to use a school that has a higher population of ELL students to get more data points. This would also be a single blind experiment, so the students would not know that there is a change in teaching methods, but a parent consent form would be signed. It would be random sampling. A parent consent form would be sent home. They would either sign it or reject it. If rejected, we would move on to the next random candidate. And then final thoughts and conclusions. So after doing this whole research study, or not research study, but the kind of research proposal process, I found that it did help my understanding that research, even setting it up, is a lot of work. You have to make sure that it's a lot harder and longer than I realized, just because you have to think about all the ethics, all of the different variables. You need to make sure that, if we were continuing this study, I'd have to find a district and a school that's willing to participate, as well as 40, parents that are willing to have their student in this in this experiment. So I think that it's a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. The most difficult part, I think, is just thinking of all the different variables that could go wrong, all the different things that I have to control. Even there are some within this study that, I could still try and control, but it is hard because it's in the real world and you want that external validity as well. Also just making sure it was ethical. Obviously, these students can't sign away their consent themselves, as one, it's a single blind experiment, as well as they're under the age of 18, so they're minors. So it would be making sure everything's ethical and making sure we're not stunting any sort of learning by trying out these different methods. And then, could I see myself doing this in the future? I'm not sure. Maybe, I think, is my best answer. I think like a little research, or like using different observations, or maybe qualitative research, just getting like feedback from students, for sure, 100%. Maybe not a full-blown experimental research study I would set up. I think I could see myself being a part of one, but I think that's something that is further in the future. But overall, I think that this was a very eye-opening experience to see what it takes to put together a research proposal and research study.